Hey Zena, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I absolutely loved Badly Behaved People. I think it is a fantastic combination of short, highly recognizable case studies backed up by a solid theory, and you managed to present everything in a very condensed and accessible manner. My first question is, what inspired you to write Badly Behaved People and how to deal with, I'm just quoting you, idiots at work?
Well, I should say a massive disclaimer that I would never call anyone an idiot. And it was my publisher that said we need to put that
Ah,
in.
she's to blame. Yeah.
Eloise, yeah, she is, because she said, look, it's SEO and people like that. And but my kids laughed actually because they said, Mom, like you always say to us, never call anyone a name, and now you've got that. So that's my first disclaimer. But the reason why I wrote the book is that and you'll be familiar with this. I was coaching people and they kept telling me a story because everybody's problems are people problems. Whatever the problem, it's not the system, it's not the technology, it's the person that installed it, isn't it? Not talking to each
Yeah.
other. And as you say about your podcast, we are living in a complicated and polarized world. And I realized that people simply weren't talking to each other. So I was coaching somebody, and they would say, typically, they'd tell me this long story about a people problem. And I'd say, have you told them how you feel, the impact of you on their behavior? And they'd go, no. And then somebody else, maybe the other side of the story, would be telling me how they felt about this set of behavior. And I'd say, have you told them about how you feel? And of course, they'd say no. And I just thought, right, I just am saying in every coaching session, have you asked them about this? Have you told them about this? Have you said to them, what's behind that? I've noticed
Yeah.
this behavior from you. You're acting uncharacteristically. What's going on? Nobody was talking to each other. So I thought, right, I'm going to put all this together. So the book, as you've seen, is composites. They're not
Yeah.
stories because I would be sued and I wanted to protect the innocent. But they're composites of all my case studies, coaching case studies, to illustrate the example that actually most people aren't badly behaved, but they're behaving in a certain way under pressure. And it's up to us really to rebuild those communication channels, simply talking to each other. And I know you've had Ralph, is it Schonenbach,
Yeah,
talking
correct. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
talking about relationships. And I just think that since it's a very long answer, Dirk, but I think in hybrid work particularly, and my other book is The Crazy Busy Cure, our busyness and the way we work has just crowded out conversation. So all those reasons I thought, right, I need to get this point across. And when I'm coaching, I say to leaders, right, do you know how your reports take their coffee? Because you should. Because you
Yeah.
should be buying them coffees or making them coffees and talking to them. And if you don't, then you don't know what's going on with your people and you need to.
I love the notion of coffee as an acid test. I think that would be it's a good acid test to let's say check if the relate how let's say the initial stages of a relationship are.
Yeah.
But what I also loved in your book, you make very let's say candid, but also let's say sometimes unpopular statements. And what I learned from it, or let's say what I read at a certain moment, is one of your statements. We don't want mindless harmony. We want just healthy, competitive friction and a shared commitment to making a difference. I think it's very refreshing because the current discourse is, that, we like to avoid speaking about competition in the workplace. And the idea seems to be if we ignore that it's even there, then it's probably doesn't happen. What triggered you to write this statement? And second question, perhaps, when does healthy and competitive friction change into unhealthy competitive friction?
Well, I think, it's Amy Edmondson's wonderful work on
Yeah,
psychological safety, isn't it? And all the Google's research for Project Aristotle, it's kind of, we want people to speak up and challenge the status quo. And I mean, as well, if not better than I do, about how we want leaders to get people to think for themselves. So they have to feel safe to say, why are we doing this? Is this a better way? And, I'm new in the business, and in my old place, we did something this way. Why are you doing it that way? We should be encouraging all those kind of conversations. And I think that sometimes psychological safety has been hijacked into something that should be all come by our harmony. And that's not, we shouldn't be, that's not what it's intending to be. But again, I think that because we're not talking enough to each other, we're frightened of challenging the status quo because we haven't got enough trust. And my big area is teaching organizations on how to give feedback, which is fairly fundamental, isn't it? And that's just having conversations all the time about how we're working together and not making it so personal.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm coming from, really. And again, hybrid working, when we're not spending enough time with each other and just actually able just to chit chat and get to know each other. So when I say, I don't know, Dirk, why are we using this platform? Because it crashes. Have you thought about that? You're not taking it personally. You're just thinking, oh, thanks, that's great. That's made my life easier. But maybe we're all a bit thin-skinned these days.
Another statement in your book, which I really like, is organizations rely on big experiences when creating culture, hyperbolic speeches and culture transformations. And what matters to the rest of us is our lived experience. The question is there, in your perspective, still a place for these extremely popular culture change initiatives we all know, where we define purposes and values and ways of working together? Or think that do you think that we could abolish these kind of institutionalized culture changes altogether?
No, I think we should do more of them because actually, where I'm coming from, the DNA of what we are as an organization and what we are as a team is absolutely crucial to both working efficiently and and also to building trust and establishing good behavior. So I think the values and the purpose are more important than ever. But it just can't be something that we do. We get expensive consultants in to write them. We put them on our website and on the wall behind reception, and then everybody rolls their eyes and gets on with business as usual. And I'm sure, like me, you've had that experience where you've said to organizations, so what are the values in this business? And they parrot off, integrity, sustainability, curiosity, kindness. And then they'll say, and there's a few more, but oh, hang on, I need to look it up. And even the people that wrote those values can't remember what they are.
No.
So unless it's taken into, I think just have a couple. I mean, I love the we don't employ idiots or, those kinds of things. One, well, the patient is the heart of everything we do, something like that. So that when people in the business have a question, they know what the values are, and then they think, okay, I can answer my own question here because the answer is what's better for the patient or what's better for the colleagues or what's better for the customer. And then, we're cooking on gas, aren't we? Because we know what the answer is, so we've solved the question. So when it's translated into everyday business, that's
Yeah.
great. But
Yeah.
the problem is when it's viewed slightly cynically because people think this is just a performance, then it's business as usual and not that trust. And what is it they say? Something about trust arrives on foot, on leaves on
Yeah.
horseback.
Yeah.
It's just so easy to lose trust, isn't it? So if the leaders don't live those values every day,
Yeah.
say something cynical, you're dead. Yeah,
Yeah,
lots.
no, I agree with you because I think also typically, let's say the purpose and values coming out of these you know culture exercises are, let's say, 8 or 9 of the 10 times more or less exactly the same. They always contain something about a customer, and they always contain something about support, and then we throw a little bit of teamwork in there, and then
Yeah.
responsibility for society as a whole. Whereas I think if you come to the type of powerful statements that you say around the patient, and I, for instance, once worked for an engineering company, and they basically said, "We do wicked things around here."
Oh,
Which basically told us everything they do. I mean, not wicked against each other, but in terms of
yeah, yeah,
wicked, in terms of
yeah.
technology, that basically expresses
Wow.
the heart of where the company stands for.
I love that because that, I find that really, that's the kind of thing I really get behind and I understand it. And then if I've got a choice of option A or option B, it's the most wicked option.
And if I completely switch gears, because there's so many interesting elements in your book that I just basically cherry picked things that really caught my eye and struck my interest, and I think everyone should really read the book for themselves to discover even more interesting elements. One of the things is what I wonder is how important is it, in your perspective, for executive coaches to look at the childhood experience of their clients? In the beginning, you stress the importance of looking at that. You, on the other hand, let's say in the end of your book, you also say, well, coaching needs to be kind of future oriented, and executive coaches are not psychotherapists. Is there a kind of balance, and what should that look like in your perspective?
Well, now, how long have we got?
Now, I think if we can do a short version on this one for 4 or 5 minutes, I think we should be okay.
Well, I did write a whole chapter in the book about coaching and the coaching profession
Yeah,
and how there are so many people who are having a stab at it. And I think sometimes they're unencumbered with any training on transference or psychological boundaries and
yeah,
all the really important things that coaches need to have so they know what they're doing. So to be clear, as you know, coaching is forward focus. So we might clock why somebody responds in a certain way. So a very simple example of this is somebody who says, I don't like to speak up in meetings. And then you would say, right, so that's a problem that's occurring right now. It's occurring in their everyday life. It's a problem for them. And so we might say, why do you think that is? And then after a little bit of digging around, they may confess that, they were brought up as a woman not to be the smartest person in the room. That might be their cultural or their family heritage to be brought up with that. You're a woman, don't appear to be cleverer than all the men because, you're never going to get a nice husband that way. For example, that's a
yeah,
case of somebody I coached. So you think, wow, okay, so this person knows they're smarter than everybody else, but they've been brought not to speak up. Now, I can't change the childhood, nor would I want to, nor is
no,
it to do that. That's not my job and that's not necessary. But you have to deal with that occurs now and help them to understand. And, they know how that's holding them back. So that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. But so from a coaching perspective, where my take on it, and I'm not a psychotherapist, is to be aware of why somebody, where that inhibiting belief comes from that then shows up and causes a problem today in their everyday work. It doesn't cause them a problem, then great. Now, I feel that leaders, managers don't know enough about what's going on in their people's lives every day. So we know, for example, that adolescent mental health or rates of mental ill health are skyrocketing. So we need to know how full someone's stress bucket is.
yeah,
You're a parent or carer of an adolescent child, chances are you may be worried about that child at the moment, and therefore you may behave uncharacteristically with some work stress. Now, I think leaders should have a sense of what somebody's backstory is, what's going on in their lives, so you can deal with them more sympathetically.
Yeah.
Where we have a kind of one size fits all. Well, I have a one-to-one with everybody once a month. So, and if they've got a problem, my door is always open. That kind of stuff. And it's not good enough anymore. And I think we've almost got so frightened of interfering, asking questions, that actually those relationships are lacking. So that's my big kind of hobby horse. I want people to talk to each other, not to pry. People have got under no obligation to share personal information. But I'm very interested in who feels their manager
Yeah.
has their back, and how many people would turn to their leader if they have a problem or if they're feeling stressed.
Yeah.
Uh, and not everybody does.
One of the quotes in your book comes from Nietzsche. There are no facts, only interpretations. And it's a point you come back to a couple of times in your book. Um, and you also write, for instance, this reframing of our beliefs is a foundation of cognitive behavioral coaching and therapy. You quote Einstein: "What we perceive as real is a cognitive distortion based on how we see the world." You also say feelings are not facts. It's something that I always struggle with a little bit, because I always have the idea, well, if people cannot trust their perception or what they see as facts, um, doesn't that make them incredibly insecure? If they cannot trust their perception, what can they trust? How do you see that issue?
Gosh, that's such a great question. So I think, is it Matthew Lieberman who talks about that neural seesaw between instinct and data? And I think we all need that kind of trade-off to think, right, I'm feeling this way. I've got a gut feeling. There's
Yeah.
like you talk about, say, having a manager. When we were chatting earlier, we talked about managers that we knew that say, oh, this is a really safe space. But actually, our gut instinct is saying, oh, don't trust that person. I feel it in my stomach. Other people feel it in their neck or their back or something. But I have this kind of visceral feeling like I can't trust this person at all. Equally, you've got such a lovely vibe, Dirk. I feel, oh, I like this. I trust this person. So I think it's a balance between data, evidence-based, and that's how we're trained, isn't it? In psychology, everything's
Yeah.
evidence-based. Don't But equally thinking, hang on, what's my gut telling me here? So all the stuff that we're talking about, going back to that care levers, that's the managers thinking, right, my gut feeling is, maybe they're coming in a little bit later, maybe they're not looking at me, maybe they're looking down at their feet when I'm talking to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
The data would be, right, this person doesn't look engaged, they're not really committed, they're not interested in being here, they're distracted, they're just going through the motions, Gen Z, all that kind of stuff. But actually, our instinct would be telling us there's more to it, there's more going on here. That's a very waffly answer, isn't it? I think but so on the flip side, we can feel, we all tell ourselves a story, don't we? Which isn't always true. I don't know that, they've promoted me, but I don't deserve to be here because, I haven't got a PhD. All the kind of stories that we tell ourselves. And then that's where the coaching comes in to say, look, just slow that down a minute. They've hired you. They're not idiots. Let's just
Yeah.
stick to this fact, shall we? Not
Yeah.
overthink them. So I think it's a seesaw, isn't it?
Yeah.
And both senses are useful to us. So feelings are very useful, but you have to put in a sense check to think, let's talk to the other person and find out
Yeah.
what's really going on.
I think there's a wise lesson there in terms of facts. Let's say feelings and gut feelings are extremely good as, let's say, first indicators, but need to be backed up, preferably by data.
And,
Yeah.
and isn't it fascinating? Because when we're coaching, we're dealing with a 300,000-year-old brain, aren't we?
Yeah.
So their brain is saying, right, you're a failure. Get out of here. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Whereas, so that's a lovely reptile brain, but they only see the negative, don't they? Reptile, monkey, whatever it is, they only see the negative in things. Get out of here. They never say the positive, which is hang in there. You could be an amazing success that will make such a difference to customers, patients, and your
Yeah,
own career. This could be amazing. But the brain is there to that bit of the brain that we're listening to is just there to keep us safe, which
yeah,
is, normally, let's just get out of here. Like, just hide. Don't look
yeah.
at your boss in the lift in case they spot you. And then all that stuff becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But what I also love is in chapter 3, you devoted it to everyday emotional intelligence. And what I love basically is a specific element you highlighted, which is anger management. And you mentioned there the infamous example of Dominic Raab, who had to step down because of his lack of, let's say, anger management, or being able
Yeah,
to put it, let's say, insufficient control. Do
yeah.
you think anger management is something people could develop? And if so, how could they develop it?
Well, I find, I'm sure you're the same, that when you give somebody some feedback, that changes behavior. I find in coaching, it doesn't, we can't just operate in a little bubble of what they think about themselves. I think normally when you have feedback that says, look, people think you're a great guy, but actually, when you lose your temper and smash your computer, you might not feel that's affecting other people, but it is. They don't like it. You may well be reminding them of the horrible bad-tempered teacher that they had when they were 7, when they couldn't,
Yeah.
might be triggering something. And in any way, that's just not how you behave as a leader. You can carry on doing that, but you're not going to get promoted because that's just not, do you remember those values in reception? That doesn't
Yeah,
fit.
yeah, Claude, there's a lack of compatibility there. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's a big disconnect. So I think usually when I present somebody with feedback, they change their behavior.
Mhm.
And, emotional self-regulation is basic, isn't it? In the same way that we have to learn to regulate everything. We're not drinking. You and I aren't knocking back the wine while we're talking. Well, I
No,
don't know what you've got in your bottle, but I don't.
there's a plain water. I can testify to that. Yeah.
And we have to control what we eat and how we behave and all that kind of stuff. So it's just basic, isn't it? And what works for me is breathing. Everybody can learn to breathe in the moment and just take a deep breath. So, but I think in fairness to that, again, the endless screen working, people are tired. They're really, really tired, and they don't have much energy left to control themselves. So that, it all comes down to the basics, isn't it? We've got to have some more fresh air and exercise and look after ourselves.
My other question is regarding career management. One of the things that I really loved, you said, corporate life rewards visibility, not unsung heroes. Do you perhaps have any practical advice for the unsung heroes with career aspirations that are listening to the podcast? And you can also take client examples because I guess you also meet multiple clients in that position. What is your guidance to them?
The people who are the unsung heroes who
Yeah.
don't like pushing themselves forward. Um, I think there's an element of hanging in there, actually. We always feel we have to keep leaping forward, but I think sometimes the tortoise wins the race. Um, but I think we all need to get better at just we don't have to talk about ourselves hyperbolically. I'm wonderful, I did this and I did that, because we all know that there's a big disconnect between how people sell themselves on LinkedIn and actually who's doing the work.
Yeah.
But I think they need to get better at showing data and evidence. We achieved this last year, and this is the outcome of that. And this is how it benefited our customer, other team, whatever it is. So I think that's where I do like the data.
Yeah.
And that's unequivocal. So there's no point in just saying, we're great in our team, we've achieved wonderful things. I think just take out all the words and have some data about what you've done well, then get better at doing that and find opportunities. So then that's not personal, that's just business. We've
Yeah.
got on this, and this is the consequence of it.
Yeah. Another category of people that you describe in your book are people who have narcissistic personality disorder, and I've been blessed, or perhaps I should say cursed, in my career to have been managed by a couple of them. And you give great advice, actually, very unorthodox. You basically said, look, just get out of it. And you use also a wonderful acronym, which I won't repeat. Because you said, well, standing up to them, especially in publics, make them
Yeah.
even worse. Could you perhaps explain how people can recognize, let's say, if let's say their leader has narcissistic personality disorder? So how can they recognize it? What would they see? And the second one is why does, let's say, standing up to them doesn't work, and is walking away just not a sense of or a sign of cowardness?
But normally with a bully, you say, listen, when you do that, this is how it makes me feel. Don't do it. Please do this. You
Yeah.
stand up to them, they go and pick on somebody else. With these kinds of characters, and I think it's something like, I put the figure in the book, it's something like 1% of the
Yeah, it's a
population.
very small. Yeah, you quote the number. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very small, but they're at the top of organizations. They're often very entrepreneurial. They're super charismatic. They've got it. They've absolutely got it. But you will feel that nothing you do is ever good enough. They're inconsistent. And I had a little sideline in coaching these people because they do enormous damage. And I have coached people who have worked for these individuals, and their lives are destroyed by them. And
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah.
yeah, several years later, their lives are still destroyed because they're thinking, if is it me? If only I'd done this, if only I was more this. I mean, they really, really get under your skin. And if the question is they feel they're treading on eggshells, I that standing up to these people is the absolute wrong advice because they come after you. They really come after you. And there's a playbook of them coming after you publicly. At the moment you stand up to them and they let you get away with it, then they bear grudges and they go after you and they make their lives miserable. It seems like they pull the rug out from people, and they go up. They want to have strong people around them, so they're not interested in going after weak, vulnerable people. They actually want to destroy really strong characters. So the damage they do is extraordinary,
Yeah.
and you know your listeners may feel that we're exaggerating, but that's a good thing because it hasn't happened to them.
Nee, that is good. Nee, but I love your very practical advice in the sense of, get out of
Yeah,
it because this is
yeah.
kind of insalvageable.
It is
Yeah,
salvageable.
yeah,
I mean, sometimes you can't get out of it because of whatever the business circumstances or life circumstances, you just can't get away. But I say just try and, if you're in a large organization, try and find a project to get away from them, a side project that gets you in a different part of the business for 6 months or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
Just try and, take a few steps to get away from that person somehow. Don't throw in your job and destroy your livelihood or something like that, but try and get as far away from them as you possibly can do. Report to somebody else, something like that. Get away from under their radar and they'll find somebody else to pick on. But the big thing is just don't go up against them. Be smart about it.
And another great piece of career advice you give in your book is that and as I said, I love the brutal honesty of some of your statement is over the last 10 to 20 years, we've all been advised to listen to our inner voice and follow our calling when we think about our careers. But you deliberately used the phrase scrappy careers, the way to see a safe path. Can you explain your thinking behind it?
Well, I like the idea of scrappy careers where we
Yeah,
think, actually, what am I doing now? Where do I add the most value? What networks can I build? What skills can I develop? How can I make the most of it? And actually, that's okay. And then be kind of looking at the next island. I think that careers are built up, particularly in this complicated and polarized world that you talk about. I think that we just have career steps from one patch of safe ground to another. And when people are worried about, where am I going with this? What am I doing next? first of all, it leads to inertia because they're stressed. And, they're so worried about doing something magnificent that they're just not enjoying today and coping and maximizing what they've got. And then I think also if they have too rigid a plan, they don't see some amazing opportunity and think, oh, hang on, that sounds fun. So it's my idea really just to take the pressure off people so they're enjoying what they're doing. It's right, isn't it, that it's networking is so important. Our networks are what create all the opportunities for us. And I think when people are, worried about what they should be doing so far, this step, that step, 5 years time and all that kind of stuff, they're not really maximizing where they are today. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, because also that let's say that North Star may never arrive, and you may sacrifice, let's say, doing valuable things which you really enjoy in the here and now, in search of that North Star, which may or may not
Yeah.
arrive. Yeah,
But
yeah,
I think it's important to have those great big goals,
yeah,
that we've done on our intention board or whatever, that, there's great big goals that are ridiculous. Really, really want this. I want my best-selling book. I want whatever it is.
yeah,
Those, but actually it's thinking, right, what have I got now? What have I got? Who should I be talking to?
yeah,
Where is it within kind of easy reach?
yeah,
Rather than making things too complicated. Because I think people get very stressed and overwhelmed. They compare themselves to other people.
yeah.
They feel they're not doing as well. And I think, well, just don't worry about that. Just think about what is in your grasp now.
Zena, I tremendously enjoyed this interview, and I felt very privileged because, as I said, I absolutely loved your book, and I think you gave me a wonderful private opportunity to pick, let's say, to cherry pick all those pieces that really struck my attention and that I find interesting. Um, but of course, I have not covered, let's say, your entire book. What is, let's say, the single most important topic that you would like to stress, and that in the context of your book, that we may not have covered in the course of this interview?
Well, can I have two? I think the message that I want people to have from the book is, first of all, let's just ask people. Let's not make assumptions about what's going on with them. Let's just talk to them. And because they were okay last month, they might not be okay this month. And let's just find out what's going on and keep asking. Inquiry-driven leadership. What's going on? How can we make this better? How are you? What's working well? Just get in the habit
Yeah,
of asking all those questions to each other. So that's the first one, ask them. Second one is boundaries.
yeah,
And I think that we all need boundaries to make us feel safe. So that's around behavior, what's acceptable, what's not
yeah,
acceptable,
yeah, yeah,
what people want from us, what our values are, the purpose that we talked about, those guardrails that help us know that we're doing a good job and we're working in a certain way. And I think that, like all of this, it comes from leaders setting good, this is the way we do things around here. So don't, and it's almost on kind of the small stuff, because like I said in the book that you referred to, real life is lived in the everyday. And that is, how are we going to communicate with each other? You send me emails at 7 o'clock in the morning. You do know that's when I'm getting my children out of the house. You know,
yeah.
are you expecting a response? It's actually going into that kind of minutiae of how we work together. The small things is so important. And what worked for us 6 months ago might not be working now. So let's just keep talking to each other.
Yeah, I agree. Zena, thank you so much for the interview. As I said, I love the book, and I will basically copy all the details in the show notes. I would also recommend everyone to read it.
Oh,
So thank you for this interview.
yeah. It's been a real pleasure. And I'm so grateful because I do loads of podcasts and people don't often read the books. And I know you've gone through it. And I wanted to write a book that people would read like it's a novel on a beach,
Yeah,
that's an easy, funny read, but actually would sit with them. So I really appreciate you taking the time to read it. And Dirk, it was lovely. Thank you.